Hi, Acadiana. I'm Meteorologist Dave Baker. Happy Thursday to you. We're still watching Hurricane Rafael, which has weakened just a little bit as it's starting to get some dry air pulled into it. Big ridge of high pressure over the Atlantic, kind of back building, which is shoving it more to the west. And hopefully we'll see that trough that's over the Four Corner states kind of stay put, and that'll keep it on more of a westerly direction, moving it into some much drier air. So weakening is forecast, so that would be good news for everyone across much of the Gulf Coast and even down along the Gulf Mexican coast. Now we still have Rafael out there, and we've also got a little bit of a tropical wave that's far to the east that might still have a chance of becoming Sebastian somewhere down the road. But the players in the forecast this morning are still a big ridge of high pressure that's currently out here over the Atlantic, and that is going to be back building a little bit over toward the Gulf of Mexico, helping to keep this on more of a westerly track. And again, as long as this upper low that's out here stays put, it should continue on a track off toward the west. So that would help us out here along the northern Gulf Coast, but it would also move it into a much more unfavorable position for any strengthening. So even our friends down in Mexico probably won't be seeing anything super duper strong. So there's that other little tropical wave that we're watching here over the northern part of the Caribbean islands. Again, it's part of an upper low there that's a little bit farther to the west. So all that could eventually become something later on down the road. So we'll focus more on Hurricane Rafael, and Rafael is continuing to make its way off toward the west. It has weakened a bit. Winds are down to 100 miles per hour, but it is still a Category 2 hurricane. And there's the coordinates there, 24.5 north and 85.2 west. Notice, though, the pressure has dropped off or starting to rise a little bit there. It is now up to 971 millibars. So the National Hurricane Center's thinking is that that ridge is going to continue to build off to the east, and the trough that's over the Four Corners is going to stay put and not deepen anymore. So that should continue it on a westerly track. But there are still a couple of models that indicate maybe that trough over the Four Corners would be strong enough to yank it northward, but it doesn't look like it would turn much of it up toward the Louisiana Gulf Coast. It might even bring it close, but then kind of loop it around as the trough moves east and the ridge continues to build west. So most models are indicating a westward track and then maybe even a southwesterly track toward the Bay of Campeche. And again, it is expected to stay a Category 2 here, probably for the next 12 to 24 hours, and then gradual weakening over the next several days. Most models are in the low-end tropical storm force range as you get out to days 4 and 5, which is right about in here on the models. That's day 4, and that's the end of day 5. So you can see just about everything is down here in the tropical storm force area. But that is due to the environmental conditions, not due to land. As far as any tropical storm force winds, there could be some in our offshore waters, although the chances of that are not great, at least right along the coast. But maybe for some of the platforms that are a little farther offshore, you might end up getting some gusty winds and some rough seas, but I don't think there's going to be any impact to the immediate Acadiana area. There could be some high tides along the coast, and again, some rougher seas and some gustier winds in the offshore waters, but on land, I think for the most part, we're going to be okay. Some of the moisture might get pulled up as that trough out in the west kind of opens up and moves northeast over the weekend. But we're already going to see a front in place, and we've already got some very moist and muggy conditions here locally. So there's already moisture for a front to work with. It doesn't need any tropical moisture to come along with it from a tropical system. So let's real quick go through some of the hurricane models and the more hurricane specific models through Sunday afternoon really have been showing more of a westward track here over the last couple of days. So that's what we're going to be looking at with the HWRF as well as the HAFS model. HAFS model also now showing considerable weakening as it moves off to the west. Yesterday, the HAFS model was keeping things a bit more intense, even into a landfall there over the southwestern coast of the Gulf of Mexico. Global models, though, the GFS still trying to pull it northward out to about day 5, but the extended models on the GFS, kind of turn it back around. So that's the one that's kind of a loop-de-loop, and then it would push it back southward toward the Bay of Campeche. So it might be able to tap into some moisture with that trough back to the west and bring some additional rain for us here in Acadiana, but I don't think it's going to be anything real significant when it comes to tropical weather. The Euro model was one of the first global models that was indicating more of that westward and southwesterly shift yesterday. And the Euro model is continuing with that particular track for today as well. Canadian model still has this thing yanking right up into the Louisiana coastline as a tropical depression with a much deeper and faster moving trough coming out from the west. Although it's still really the only model that's indicating that type of scenario, and that would also tend to maybe bring some cooler temperatures for us here locally. But I don't really see that in any of the extended models. I think we're going to stay kind of muggy here all the way through the weekend and even into the early part of next week. Finally, the Icon model has a drift off toward the west, a little bit of a turn toward the north. But then you can see the system just kind of fizzles out there over the central part of the Gulf of Mexico and maybe starts to make a drift a little bit farther toward the south. But as we go out to Sunday afternoon, that's the closest the GFS has it. But notice to the east, there's no other tropical system being indicated by the GFS, at least through the end of the weekend. The Euro model also kind of backing off on a secondary system, Sebastian, would you say, there over the northern part of the Caribbean. But you can see that the Euro model going out to Sunday has Rafael much farther offshore than what the GFS is showing. Now, the Canadian model, again, tries to still bring this thing toward the Louisiana coast. It is still the outlier on all the models, so this is the one that will kind of throw out a little bit. There's some moisture starting to build over toward Puerto Rico, but there's no significant low pressure area that's being indicated there. So at this time, we can kind of dismiss the northward turn of Rafael, and at least on the Canadian model, it doesn't seem to be too impressed with what Sebastian could possibly be. And the Icon model is similar to the GFS as well as the European model, kind of keeping a broad low pressure area or a weak tropical depression or tropical storm out in the central part of the Gulf. And then farther down in days 6, 7, and 8, it tends to take it a little bit farther to the south toward the Bay of Campeche. So really most of the models are in agreement with the National Hurricane Center's forecast, a drift a little bit farther toward the west and then maybe a turn a little bit back down toward the southwest. So that would be minimal impacts for us locally here in the Acadiana area. Couple of things that are still going for this hurricane, though. Water temperatures are above 80 degrees across most of the Gulf of Mexico, although they are not like what the water temperatures are like in the Caribbean Sea. They are definitely cooler, and they're a lot cooler than what we saw when Hurricane Milton formed there in the southern part of the Gulf of Mexico and the Bay of Campeche. So that would be more of an inhibiting factor on any strengthening. And the tropical cyclone heat potential there in the southern part of the Gulf of Mexico is considerably lower than what you see here over the western part of the Caribbean, where we saw some intensification during the day yesterday, bringing it up to a Category 3 hurricane. As far as the wind shear, it's still kind of in a low wind shear environment, although it does appear that the southwestern eye wall is now open and it's starting to pull in some of that drier air. Now that's all according to the recon aircraft, but there's a lot of wind shear across the western and northwestern part of the Gulf of Mexico. And even going into this weekend, now remember the GFS is the one that brings the low closest to Louisiana, but even with the GFS going into Sunday here, it would be ripped apart pretty quick by a lot of that wind shear, and it would be managing over colder waters if this one were to verify. But again, the GFS is considerably farther north compared to some of the other computer models that we're looking at. Also wanted to throw out here that later next week and even into the following week, there's still a chance that we could see additional tropical weather across parts of the Caribbean, which is the normal place that you would see development during the month of November. But remember, hurricane season doesn't officially end until November the 30th, although usually in November we don't have a lot of tropical systems, but at least the Global Tropics Hazard Outlook, which has actually been a pretty good product over the course of the hurricane season, giving us a 2 to 3 week kind of an outlook of what may or may not be going on. But it is showing slightly above normal activity, both for week 2 and week 3 there over the western part of the Caribbean. Caribbean. So a Sebastian may not be out of the question if the one that's trying to develop north of Puerto Rico right now doesn't happen. Perhaps we could still get one before the hurricane season is over. And remember, hurricane season doesn't officially end until November the 30th, and occasionally we do have tropical systems that extend their way into December. Let's hope 2024 is not that year. Well, that's what I got for you here this morning. Please like this video, subscribe to my channel, and turn on those notifications. Of course, throughout the day, don't forget you can hear your local forecast on Big 102.1, Planet Radio 106.7, and Freedom 95.1. And any other updates that come along with Hurricane Rafael or any other tropical weather, severe weather, or radar checks, you can also follow my social media pages both on Facebook and X. I hope you have a great afternoon. I'll do another update after the 3 o'clock advisory later today with Hurricane Rafael. Until then, I hope you have a great afternoon. See you then.